Tonight, an Atlanta pastor who led a national boycott of Target is reacting to news of a leadership change at the company. Pastor Jamal Bryant of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Stonecrest says he plans to keep.
There comes a moment in the story of every influential figure when the narrative begins to change. The admiration that once seemed unshakable starts giving way to scrutiny, and supporters begin asking difficult questions. For Pastor Jamal Bryant, many believe that moment has arrived. For years, Bryant built a reputation as a powerful preacher, activist, and community leader capable of inspiring thousands from the pulpit and beyond. But recently, a series of controversies has placed him under an uncomfortable spotlight. From public disputes and failed campaigns to personal scandals and old allegations resurfacing, the conversation around Bryant is changing in ways few could have predicted. The boycott that lost its momentum. The latest controversy surrounding Jamal Bryant began with what initially looked like one of the most successful and influential campaigns of his career. In early 2025, Bryant called for a nationwide boycott of Target after the retail giant scaled back several diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The announcement quickly gained attention across social media, news outlets, and activist circles. Many consumers, particularly within Black communities, viewed the company's decision as a retreat from commitments it had previously made. Bryant stepped forward as one of the most visible leaders of the movement, encouraging people to use their purchasing power to hold corporations accountable. As the boycott gathered momentum, Bryant repeatedly emphasized the enormous economic influence Black consumers. He argued that companies often underestimate the impact of organized consumer action and reminded audiences that Black Americans represent trillions of dollars in spending power. Supporters embraced the message, seeing it as a powerful example of economic activism. Reports suggesting that Target was experiencing declining store traffic and a significant drop in market value seemed to reinforce the belief that the campaign was having a measurable effect. The movement appeared to gain even more credibility when Target's longtime chief executive announced plans to step down. Bryant publicly pointed to the development as evidence that pressure from consumers was forcing the company to take notice. As a result, he became a frequent guest on television programs and in newspaper interviews, where he was often presented as a leading voice in the national conversation about corporate accountability and economic justice. For a period of time, everything seemed to be moving in Bryant's favor. Activists praised his leadership, supporters celebrated the campaign's visibility, and many observers viewed the boycott as proof that organized public pressure could influence major corporations. Bryant appeared to have transformed a sermon into a national movement. Then came the moment that changed the conversation. In March 2026, Bryant announced that the boycott would officially end because the campaign had supposedly achieved most of its objectives. Instead of being welcomed as a victory declaration, however, the announcement immediately sparked controversy. Critics argued that Target had not reversed the policies that originally triggered the boycott and had not made any meaningful new commitments. Even more damaging, several grassroots organizers claimed they had never agreed to end the campaign at all. Among the strongest voices challenging Bryant was civil rights attorney Nikema Levy Armstrong, who publicly rejected the decision and insisted that the boycott would continue. She argued that many of the people who had built the movement from the ground up had not been consulted. Her criticism resonated with supporters who believed local organizers deserved more recognition and influence than they had received. Almost overnight, what had looked like a major victory became a public dispute. Facing growing backlash, Bryant issued an apology within days, acknowledging that he had misread the position of the broader movement. While some praised him for taking responsibility, others questioned whether the apology represented genuine accountability or simply another effort to regain control of the narrative before critics could define it for him. The controversy left many wondering whether Bryant had miscalculated the moment or whether the public was beginning to view his leadership differently than before. A dress, a sermon, and growing criticism. As if the fallout from the Target boycott controversy were not enough, Jamal Bryant soon found himself at the center of an entirely different public debate, one that had nothing to do with activism, economics, or church leadership. Instead, it revolved around his family and a social media storm that quickly spiraled into a national conversation. In late 2025, Bryant's wife, Carrie Bryant, attended a charity event wearing a black gown featuring sheer mesh panels. Under normal circumstances, it might have been little more than another celebrity fashion moment, but because she was married to one of the country's most visible pastors, the outfit quickly became the subject of intense discussion online. Critics argued that the dress was inappropriate for the wife of a prominent religious leader, and claimed that it failed to reflect the standards they believed church leaders should uphold. Social media platforms became flooded with opinions, debates, and criticism from people who felt strongly about the issue. Supporters, however, saw the backlash very differently. They argued that the criticism was unfair, outdated, and excessive. Many pointed out that Carrie Bryant was an individual capable of making her own choices, and questioned why her clothing had become a national topic of discussion. To them, the controversy reflected a tendency to place unrealistic expectations on pastors' families, and particularly on women connected to church leadership. What surprised many observers was not the criticism itself, but Bryant's response to it. Rather than allowing the conversation to fade away, he chose to address it directly from the pulpit. During a New Year's Eve service, speaking passionately to his congregation, Bryant defended his wife and made it clear that he stood firmly behind her. He told church members that he had personally purchased the dress and that he liked it. He also emphasized that his wife was accountable to him, not to strangers on the internet offering unsolicited opinions. His remarks immediately generated another round of discussion. Supporters praised Bryant for publicly defending his wife and refusing to allow critics to dictate how his family should live. They viewed his response as an act of loyalty and commitment, arguing that many husbands would have remained silent rather than stand beside their spouse during a public controversy. Others were less impressed. Critics argued that Bryant's decision to devote sermon time to a social media dispute suggested that he was becoming increasingly focused on responding to public criticism. Some questioned whether a pastor's primary responsibility should be addressing internet debates, rather than focusing on spiritual teaching and ministry. What began as a conversation about a dress had evolved into a broader debate about leadership, priorities, and public image. The controversy grew even larger when respected church leaders publicly weighed in with their own opinions. As the discussion spread beyond social media and into religious circles, Bryant and his wife eventually appeared on national television to discuss the matter. Although they attempted to shift the conversation toward more meaningful topics, the incident had already become part of the public narrative surrounding Bryant. Then, just as the criticism surrounding the dress began to fade, another strange and highly public incident occurred. During a church service in January 2026, a visiting preacher unexpectedly interrupted worship and loudly denounced Bryant in front of the congregation. Witnesses watched as the man shouted accusations before security personnel escorted him from the sanctuary. The disruption quickly went viral online, generating headlines and social media reactions across the country. Bryant responded publicly to the incident, arguing that disruptions of religious services should be treated seriously, and calling attention to what he believed was unequal treatment compared to similar incidents at other churches. His comments generated additional debate, keeping him firmly in the headlines. Viewed separately, each of these incidents may have seemed relatively minor. A controversy over a dress, a heated sermon, and an unexpected interruption during church service would normally be temporary stories. But occurring so close together, they created a very different impression. To many observers, Bryant increasingly appeared to be a leader constantly responding to controversy rather than setting the agenda himself. For supporters, these events demonstrated that Bryant was being unfairly targeted because of his visibility and influence. For critics, they suggested a leader struggling to maintain control of the public narrative. Either way, the controversies contributed to a growing perception that one of America's most recognizable pastors was facing more public scrutiny than ever before, leaving many to wonder how someone who once seemed nearly untouchable had become surrounded by so many battles at the same time. The preacher who was born into ministry? To understand how Jamal Bryant became one of the most recognizable pastors in America, it is important to look at the foundation that shaped him long before the headlines, controversies, and national attention. For Bryant, ministry was never simply a career path he discovered later in life. It was part of his family legacy. His father served as a bishop, his grandfather held the same role before him, and his mother was a respected minister, speaker, and author. The church was not just a place he attended on Sundays, it was woven into nearly every aspect of his upbringing. From an early age, he was surrounded by religious leadership, public speaking, and the responsibilities that came with serving a congregation. Yet despite being born into a family deeply rooted in ministry, Bryant's journey to success was far from predictable. As a teenager, he struggled academically and faced a number of setbacks that threatened to derail his future. He attended multiple schools, encountered disciplinary problems, and experienced challenges that left many questioning whether he would ever fulfill the expectations that came with his family name. At one point, few people would have imagined that the young man facing those difficulties would eventually become the leader of one of the nation's largest churches. What makes Bryant's story remarkable is the way he responded to those obstacles. Rather than allowing failure to define him, he gradually rebuilt his life. He earned his diploma, continued his education, and eventually enrolled at Morehouse College, one of the country's most respected historically Black institutions. From there, he pursued theological training and became increasingly involved in youth leadership and civil rights initiatives. His work connected him with organizations dedicated to empowering young people, and he quickly developed a reputation as a gifted speaker capable of motivating large audiences. The ability to recover from setbacks became one of the defining themes of Bryant's life. Time after time, he demonstrated an unusual capacity to rebound from adversity and turn challenges into opportunities. That resilience helped fuel the next major chapter of his career. In 2000, Bryant founded a church in Baltimore with only a few dozen members meeting in a rented facility. What began as a small congregation soon experienced extraordinary growth. Within a relatively short period, attendance climbed into the thousands, making it one of the fastest-growing churches in the region. Bryant's energetic preaching style, strong community involvement, and media presence helped attract a growing audience. Television broadcasts, radio programs, and outreach initiatives expanded his influence far beyond the walls of the church itself. As his profile grew, so did the admiration of his supporters. Many viewed him as a living example of perseverance and determination. To them, Bryant represented proof that personal setbacks do not have to determine a person's future. His story resonated with people who had experienced their own struggles and were looking for inspiration. At the same time, critics began expressing concerns about aspects of his message. Some argued that his preaching placed too much emphasis on personal achievement, financial success, and prosperity. They worried that themes of wealth and blessings sometimes received more attention than sacrifice, accountability, or spiritual discipline. Bryant consistently pushed back against those criticisms, insisting that his message was about hope and empowerment rather than materialism. Nevertheless, the debate followed him as his influence continued to expand. Over time, a pattern began to emerge. Whenever Bryant encountered setbacks, controversies, or criticism, he seemed able to recover and move forward. His resilience became one of the qualities that defined his public image. Supporters saw it as evidence of strength and perseverance. Critics, however, began to wonder whether repeated recovery sometimes insulated him from meaningful consequences. In their view, the ability to rebound from every challenge may have contributed to a sense of confidence that occasionally bordered on invincibility. Whether viewed as a testament to determination or as a source of controversy, Bryant's remarkable ability to rebuild after adversity remains one of the most important themes in understanding both his rise to prominence and the debates that continue to surround him today. The marriage and the court records. In 2002, Jamal Bryant married Jamal Brayant, and from the outside, they appeared to be the picture-perfect family at the center of a growing ministry. As Bryant's influence expanded and his church continued to attract larger crowds, the couple became well known within both religious and public circles. Together, they built a family, welcomed children, and projected an image that seemed to represent success, stability, and spiritual leadership. To many observers, they looked like a model ministry family with a promising future ahead of them. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was far more complicated. While Bryant's public profile continued to rise, his marriage was facing serious challenges. By 2008, the relationship had deteriorated to the point where divorce proceedings were underway. The following year, the marriage officially came to an end, bringing an abrupt close to what many had viewed as one of the most recognizable pastoral families in the country. The divorce immediately attracted attention because of Bryant's position as a prominent church leader. Over the years that followed, Giselle spoke publicly about the breakdown of the marriage through interviews, television appearances, and media discussions. While she often chose her words carefully, her comments painted a picture of ongoing problems that extended beyond isolated incidents. She suggested that the issues within the relationship reflected patterns of behavior that had persisted over time and eventually became impossible for her to accept. Those statements carried significant weight because they challenged the carefully crafted public image that surrounded Bryant. For many people, the contrast between the successful pastor seen on stage and the struggles described by his former wife raised difficult questions. The story remained in the public eye long after the divorce was finalized, ensuring that the controversy would continue to follow Bryant throughout much of his career. The situation became even more complicated years later when paternity and child support disputes became matters of public record. Legal filings, court proceedings, and judicial rulings brought private matters into public view. Unlike rumors circulating online or speculation shared on social media, these developments involved official court documents and legal decisions that could be examined and verified. As media coverage increased, so did the scrutiny surrounding Bryant's personal life. Critics argued that the legal disputes raised legitimate concerns about accountability and responsibility, particularly for someone serving as a prominent spiritual leader. They viewed the court records as evidence that some of the criticisms directed at Bryant over the years could not simply be dismissed as gossip or personal attacks. Supporters, however, saw the situation differently. They argued that personal and family matters should not overshadow decades of ministry work, community service, and leadership. In their view, mistakes and personal struggles should not be allowed to define an entire career or erase positive contributions made over many years. Regardless of where people stood, one thing became clear: these controversies were not fading away. The divorce, public statements, and legal disputes became permanent parts of the conversation surrounding Jamal Bryant. For better or worse, they remained intertwined with his public image, ensuring that discussions about his ministry would often include questions about his personal life as well. The comeback strategy. Despite every controversy, Bryant repeatedly demonstrated an extraordinary ability to recover. Perhaps nowhere was that more evident than in the way he handled public criticism. In 2018, he accepted the position of senior pastor at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church near Atlanta, one of the most influential Black megachurches in the country. The role came with enormous challenges, as the church was still dealing with the fallout from controversies involving its previous leadership. Yet Bryant managed to stabilize the congregation and re-establish its national profile. Once again, he had turned adversity into opportunity. Years later, he publicly acknowledged mistakes that many believed he would never discuss. During podcast appearances, Bryant admitted to failures in his personal life and described himself as having been selfish during certain periods of his past. These admissions generated praise from some audiences who viewed them as signs of growth and maturity. Others were less convinced. Critics argued that the timing of many of these confessions seemed carefully calculated. They noted that admissions often arrived when Bryant faced heightened scrutiny or needed to rebuild public support. Whether intentional or not, the strategy frequently worked. Bryant would acknowledge mistakes, frame them as lessons learned, and move forward. The question now is whether that formula remains effective. As more people revisit past controversies and connect them to current events, some wonder whether the public is becoming less willing to accept another comeback story. Jamal Bryant's story is ultimately a story about influence, resilience, controversy, and public perception. Few religious leaders have demonstrated such an ability to survive scandals, rebuild their image, and remain relevant through decades of criticism. Time and again, he has faced challenges that might have ended another public career, yet he has consistently found a way to remain at the center of the conversation. The question now is whether this latest wave of criticism is different. Has the public finally grown tired of the cycle of controversy and recovery? Or will Bryant once again find a way to reinvent himself and move forward? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe another comeback is possible? Or has public trust been permanently damaged? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth stories and analysis.